conscious of the importance of human rights and freedoms.
In Sorbonne, Paris, September 28, 1948, Eleanor Roosevelt delivered a speech titled "The Struggle for Human Rights." Although it was presented in Paris, it was intended for the American people. Roosevelt was a member of the United Nations and was in the process of drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights while writing this speech. Prior to this, she served as First Lady of the United States. The speech was given in response to the Cold War and pressure from President Truman. She believed that giving the speech would encourage respect for human rights.
The purpose of Roosevelt's speech is to help preserve and highlight the importance of preserving human rights. Specifically, she promotes democracy among the United Nations that don't have a democratic look on the rights of freedom for people. With this, she allows the nation to consider a new way of government and living for all to unite and be equal.
You must not be confused about what freedom is. Basic human rights are simple and easily understood. Freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, petition. The right to security in homes, free from unreasonable search and seizure. Arbitrary arrest and punishment. We must not be misled by forces distorting these ideals, and thereby confusing the struggle. Democracy, freedom, and human rights have not come to have a definite meaning to the people of the world. We must not allow any nation to change so that they are made synonymous with superstition and dictatorship. The basic problems confronting the world today, as I said in the beginning, is the preservation of human freedom. We are fighting this battle again today as it was fought at the time of the French Revolution. And at the time of the American Revolution, the issue of human liberty is as decisive now as it was then. I want to give you my conception of what freedom means in my country.
Long ago in London, during a discussion with Mr. Wyszynski, he told me there is no such thing as freedom for an individual in the world. All freedom of an individual was conditioned by the rights of others. That, of course, I said, we approach the question from a different point of view. We here in the United Nations are trying to develop ideals which would be broader in outlook, which first means to consider the rights of man. The totalitarian state typically places the will of people second to degrees promulgated by a few men at the top. However, in a democracy, this is not a restriction. Indeed, we make our freedoms secure because each of us is expected to respect the rights of others, and we are free to make our own laws. Freedom for our people is not only a right, but also a tool. Freedom of speech, press, information, and assembly are not just abstract ideals to us. They are tools with which we create a way of life in which we can enjoy freedom.
At times, our democratic processes may seem slow, leading some leaders to consider dictatorship as a quicker route to desired outcomes. But there is no way of ensuring that a dictatorship will remain benevolent or that power, once in the hands of a few, will be returned to people without struggle or revolution. We've learned from experience that democracy's slow pace is preferable, as shortcuts risk compromising principles that are non-negotiable.
In her speech, Mrs. Roosevelt underscores the critical importance of safeguarding and advancing human rights, especially during the tumultuous era of the Cold War. She contrasts the principle of democracy with the oppressive nature of totalitarianism, highlighting how the protection of human rights is integral to the establishment of a just society. Through her comparisons, she paints a stark contrast between societies that respect individual liberties and those that suppress them. Furthermore, Roosevelt implores the shared responsibility of all nations to unite in upholding these rights, emphasizing that the collective defense of freedom is essential for global stability and progress.
Eleanor Roosevelt, from the very beginning of her speech, makes use of antithesis to clearly define the differences between the United States and the USSR. In order to highlight the importance of human rights, she presents the two governments as polar opposites, a good government and an evil one. She illustrates American democracy as the ideal picture of freedom, saying, "We make our freedom secure because each of us is expected to respect the rights of others, and we are free to make our own laws." However, when discussing communism, she describes the tragic consequences for humans being ruled by totalitarian systems. By posing the two on opposing sides, Roosevelt manages to convince her audience that the USSR is violating human rights and creates a sense of urgency surrounding it. This urges her audience to choose democracy, which in her words equals freedom. Furthermore, her use of antithesis evokes a sense of patriotism. She compares the United States and Soviet Union during a time when anti-Russian sentiment was at its peak. Roosevelt pits the two countries and their ideologies against each other to elicit an emotional response from her audience. She uses Antithesis to take advantage of her American audience's patriotism to encourage them to uphold American ideals.
In order to highlight the urgency and dire state of human rights, Roosevelt used historical references and compared their current situation to those in the past. From the very first sentence, Roosevelt establishes the historical significance of the place where she chose to deliver her speech. She chose to deliver her speech in France because there, the great slogans of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, were first proclaimed. These words may sound familiar because they are essentially the same as those outlined in the U.S. Constitution. Roosevelt chose to mention the French Revolution because there are parallels between both situations. In both, the fundamental human rights are at stake. She says that we are fighting this battle again today as it was fought at the time of the French Revolution and at the time of the American Revolution. By comparing current events to great wars such as the French and the American, Roosevelt is able to make it sound much more important. These two events completely changed the trajectory of both nations and dealt with the preservation of human rights. By comparing them, she is able to make their current situation sound more urgent and therefore encourage her audience to fight for the preservation of democracy.
In order to emphasize the importance of differentiating the USSR and the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt makes use of Anaphora. Throughout her speech, she repeats phrases like differences between a democratic and totalitarian country, emphasizing the distinction between the two nations. By consistently repeating differences, she accentuates the separation between them, reinforcing the message that the United States holds a distinct and more preferable perspective on human rights. This repetition primes the audience to anticipate further comparisons. For instance, she highlights the Soviet Union's belief in absolute power towards the government rather than its own citizens like the United States. This example highlights the USSR's approach to governance, implying negative connotations. This prepares our audience to expect another comparison between the two nations, further solidifying support for democratic principles. With her use of Anaphora as a constant reminder, Roosevelt aims to emphasize the superiority of democratic values over the oppressive measures associated with totalitarian regimes, as exemplified by the USSR.
Her overall tone is authoritative, showing she is unwilling to compromise, while simultaneously sympathetic to those living in the Soviet Union. She makes sure to show her audience that she is decisive and reliable. She says phrases such as, "No compromise is possible." Roosevelt is confident and unwavering. This encourages her audience to trust her and follow her words. She also makes the Soviet Union look unfavorable by expressing her sympathy to those living there. By employing an authoritative tone, she commands attention from her audience and convinces them to share the responsibilities of preserving human rights. She also uses tone and diction in order to reiterate the precarious state of human rights and the antagonistic nature of the USSR.
The building of human rights would be one of the foundation stones on which we would build in the world an atmosphere in which peace could grow.